With work progressing on the Myton Gate, Castle Street and Ward Area 63, this, along with the recent Castle Street archaeological digs, has provided an opportunity to look at this corner of Myton's history. Nowhere near an exhaustive talk on Myton, it is simply a brief history using some of the records held at the History Centre to illustrate Myton's past. It focuses largely on the area of South Myton between Anlaby Road and the Humber Estuary. Myton as a name has somewhat fallen out of use. Ask those living in what is historically Myton, and they will tell you they perhaps live on Hesel Road, Great Thornton Street, Springbank, or perhaps the Marina. Indeed, Myton as an electoral ward was retired by Hull City Council in 2018. Despite this, Myton is still woven into Hull's fabric. For example, amateur rugby club Myton Warriors, Myton Gate, Myton Bridge and Myton Street all take their names after Myton. Myton is bounded to its west by what is today Walton Street, Wallaker Street and West Dock Avenue. To its south is the Humber Estuary. Its east is Hull's Old Town, while North Myton borders Springbank and Marlborough Avenue. Myton probably derives its name from Danish settlers of the 9th century. The name means farm, meeting at two rivers. Prior to the Norman conquest, Myton was an Old English lordship of around 900 acres. After the Norman conquest, Myton was made up of around 200 acres of arable land, each with meadows, pastures, sheepfolds and cottages valued at 30 shillings a year. At the time of Doomsday in 1086, Ralph Mortimer was Myton's tenant-in-chief. Later landholders included Sir William Ayton and Muse Abbey. The precise location of the hamlet of Myton is unknown. Although lost, a clue to its location can be traced with the line of Myton Gate. Originally Lyle Street, Myton Gate today is one of Hull's main arterial roads, but was once the principal street leading to the hamlet of Myton. Following the line of Myton Gate, the hamlet of Myton was more than likely located around the area of the former Myton Gate roundabout, close to what is Commercial Road and the Holy Trinity burial ground today. By the late 12th century, the port of Wyke, within the manor of Myton, had emerged as a major port along the Humber. The port of Wyke lay just south of the hamlet of Myton. The port's size was reputed by 19th century historian Travis Cook to have been the size of Hull's Old Town. Although its size is not clear, Wyke would have been inhabited by merchants and traders. Wine from Europe was imported, while wool went in the opposite direction. Those that farmed Myton's land would have perhaps supplied some of the wool to export. Such was its importance as a port, wool was collected at Wyke to help pay for the ransom of Richard the Lionheart. Being low-lying, much of the area, including that of Myton, was susceptible to flooding. Waters from the rivers Hull and Humber would often lead to salt marsh, cars and slow-moving watercourses littering the landscape. The port of Wyke's demise came about in the mid-13th century when flooding is believed to have altered the course of the River Hull. Prior to this, the River Hull had ran further west than its present course. The old course turned west at High Flags, close to what is the Whalebone Public House today. From here, it meandered its way southwest, passing the site of Hull City Hall before linking up with what is today Ferrens Way's southern tip, before continuing down the line of Commercial Road to its outfall at Limekiln Creek and into the Humber Estuary. Sometime from the 1250s, the River Hull continued south at High Flags to its current outfall with the Humber, though the river's outfall would have been further north prior to land reclamation of the early 19th century. Another factor also believed to have aided the flow of the River Hull was drainage improvements by Sayer, Lord of Sutton, from the mid-13th century. A new cut or channel was dug by Sayer to the east, providing him with direct access to the Humber through what became Sayer Creek, which eventually formed a part of the current River Hull. The old channel continued, but within a couple of decades this silted up, which signalled the end for the port of Wyke. With the old river now redundant, a new port was established 1 kilometre further east, also called Wyke, but renamed Hull in 1293 when the Abbot of Muse granted Edward I Wyke, who in turn renamed it Kingstown upon Hull. Despite the old river silting up, parts which cut through Myton were still recognisable in places into the 19th century. Limekiln Creek was still recorded on early 19th century maps. Myton, however, remained separate to the town of Hull, and although the manor was granted to the corporation in 1552, Myton remained rural. Even by the later 18th century, and with industrialisation, Myton was described as an airy open street, often viewed as a fine walk. Elsewhere in Myton, several mills, brickworks, and a small number of isolated dwellings would have scattered the landscape. Myton was the location of Hull's town gallows. They were located by what is today the A63, formerly a part of Waverley Street. Once known as Gallows Lane, it was here that the punishment of death was carried out. During the English Civil War, Royalist forces established a gun battery by the town gallows, but this was repelled by parliamentary forces who had held the town of Hull. The last public execution to take place on the site was that of John Rogerson, who was hung for counterfeiting coin. The execution was carried out on the 19th of August 1778, though the town gallows remained until 1811. Gallows Lane was later renamed Great Thornton Street. Not only was Myton a place of execution, Myton also later became the centre of criminal punishment. Hull's former jail, located between Market Place and Queen Street, became insufficient and was replaced with a new jail, now the Borough Jail, located just outside the town walls in Myton. Opened in 1785, it was located along Castle Street. Originally built to house 22 prisoners, this too became inadequate, with more than 30 being housed at any one time. It was decided that a new jail be built. Once again, Myton was the chosen location, but this time Kingston Street, just a stone's throw away from the old Borough Jail. The new jail, or House of Correction as it was known, opened in 1829. Located on the eastern side of Manor Street, it was made up of 5 blocks radiating from a central hub. In 1835, the average daily population was 85. However, like its predecessor, the Borough Jail, this too became inadequate, and a new jail was built in 1865 on a 12-acre site on Headon Road, now of course Hull Prison. Myton's development began to gather pace from the turn of the 19th century. Hull had begun to expand north and west into Myton. Desirable properties appeared in the area referred to as English Town. English Town centred around English Street and was developed by merchant Thomas English. Bellevue Terrace and Lister Street were 2 such streets consisting of these desirable properties. To serve Myton's expanding population, the Church of St James was built in 1831. Located in St James Square, Lister Street, the church had seating for 1,000. It closed in the mid-1950s and was demolished in 1957. The site is now a small garden. The original layout of English Town is visible, though the properties have long since disappeared, with the area now home to industry and small factory units. In 1837, Myton was incorporated into the borough of Kingston upon Hull. Perhaps the most recognised name associated with Myton is that of Smith and Nephew. Established by Thomas James Smith in 1856 as a dispensing chemist, shortly before his death Thomas was joined by his nephew, Horatio Nelson Smith, and the business became known as T.J. Smith and Nephew. It was under Horatio's leadership that the company transformed. In 1906, larger premises were needed, and the company moved to their current site in Neptune Street, a step up from the days of Thomas Smith's premises on Whitefrigate and later's numbers 10 and 11 North Churchside. The First World War saw the company undertake a contract for surgical and medical dressings, which proved lucrative. The company continued to grow and developed into the 20th and 21st centuries and is now one of the world's largest suppliers of medical equipment. Smith and Nephew's association with Myton, its location for over a century, will cease in 2024 with its relocation just outside the city at Melton. Another name that has long fallen out of use in Myton is the Potteries. Situated close to English Street, it derived its name from the pottery of William Bell, established in 1826 on the area around what is today the Kingston Retail Park. Taking Bellevue after the affluent terrace nearby, Bellevue Pottery ended production in 1841, and with it, its unofficial name, the Potteries, fell out of use. As industrialisation brought huge swathes of the country's population to the growing towns and cities of industrial Britain, Hull and with it Myton saw its population dramatically increase. Myton's population in 1821 was just over 10,900 with 2,400 houses. Within 20 years, the number of houses and population had doubled, and by 1861, Myton's population was just shy of 40,000, with 8,500 houses. To accommodate the growth in population, cheap and poorly built houses, more commonly known as slums, filled much of Myton, and with it, new and existing streets were developed. This included Great Passage Street, which itself was probably an ancient road. Upper Union Street, Nile Street, Fawcett Street, to name a few, were laid out and built upon. The once airy, open spaces were now taken up by housing. In 1881, Myton's population had reached almost 65,000, the population of a small town today. Myton's residents included butchers, shopkeepers, greengrocers, master mariners, watchmakers, and labourers, all of whom lived and worked in the area. This was very much repeated across Myton. Osborne Street, for example, was very multicultural, not only home to a large Jewish population, but also included other nationalities and religious creeds. With such a dense working-class population, it's not surprising that Myton was home to a number of public houses. Almost every street had a public or beer house. Most have long since disappeared, with just a handful in existence. One of Myton's oldest was the Robin Hood Hotel on Myton Place. Originally a wine and spirits store, it opened in the late 18th century. It was demolished in 1968, though when built would have had quite a rural feel at the time prior to Myton's urban development. At Myton's eastern edge, just before Hull's Old Town, was the White Horse Inn, which predated the current White Horse Public House. Built from the mid-18th century, it was situated on Carr Lane, which was the main route to Hull's west, slicing through Myton at its eastern edge before linking up with Anlaby Road and the Carrs to the west. The White Horse Inn was surrounded by fields, a far cry from the busy scene we see today in the centre of Hull. The present White Horse Public House dates from 1956. Other public houses no longer in existence include Westdock Hotel on English Street, the Corporation Arms on Neptune Street, and the Three Tons on Great Passage Street. Today, just a small number of public houses serve the area. These include Inkerman Tavern on Alfred Street, the Alexander Hotel and Vauxhall Tavern along the Hessel Road stretch of the A63, and of course the Whittington and Cat. Another public house that existed only till recently was Earl de Grey. A listed building, the idea is to return its facade to its original location, fronting the A63 opposite the marina. Its future, however, remains somewhat unclear. Myton changed little into the early 20th century, remaining home to tens of thousands of Hull's inhabitants. However, the second half of the 20th century saw a new phase in Myton's development. Like elsewhere across Hull, Myton was heavily bombed during the war. Densely populated streets gave way to bomb sites, which for many children became playgrounds in the years after the war. The post-war years saw much of Myton's development we see today. Perhaps the most recognised is the area around Great Thornton Street. Here, Victorian housing has given way to modern high-rise flats and housing. Icelandic Close, for example, was developed thanks to funding from the Icelandic government in memory of those fishermen who lost their lives. Adelaide, Melbourne, Wellington and Auckland House were all built in the early 1950s. The high-rise flats along Anlaby Road were under construction in 1963 and began to take their first residents in 1965. Earlier flats built between the wars are still occupied, most notably those on Cogan Street, Adelaide Street and Porter Street. The construction of the A63 was one of the catalysts for change on Myton's southern edge in the 1970s. Mytongate and the stretch of Hessel Road from Great Passage Street was turned into dual carriageway, replacing the stretch of Hessel Road, once known as Patrick Ground Lane, believed to have been named after local tanner Patrick, who had property in the area. Nile Street, which once included properties built in 1795, disappeared. The earlier cattle or beast market, which once stood outside the town walls in the 18th and 19th centuries on what is now Prince's Dock, was relocated behind Nile Street, with its southern edge on Edwards Place. The site now forms a part of the Kingston Retail Park. Elsewhere, the former Borough Gaol is now the site of homes built in the city centre during the 1980s between Kingston and Wellington Street. Other streets that have long ceased to exist include Wakefield Street, Spruce Street, Fawcett Street and Burton Street, while properties on Daltry and Madeley Street have given way to the Daltry Street flyover, which now forms a part of the slip road on and off the A63. Myton is still changing and evolving today. The last couple of years have seen the removal of the Myton Gate roundabout. The A63 will dip under the former roundabout to help improve traffic flow, a far cry from the Myton Gate of the early 1970s. This, along with other developments, have provided archaeologists with an opportunity to help understand this corner of Myton's history. Evidence of two buildings that could have formed part of the original settlement of Wyke have been found, while excavations in the Cashel Street Cemetery has unearthed around 1,500 burials, providing an insight into life and death of those that lived in and around Myton from the late 18th and early 19th centuries, including victims believed to be that from one of Hull's worst disasters, that of the Union steam packet which exploded in 1837. We hope you have enjoyed this episode in our Stories from the Strongroom series and have inspired you to visit the History Centre and discover more about Myton, or perhaps something else about Hull. Why not keep up to date with our work, our collections and the service we provide by following our social media channels via Facebook, Twitter and soon Instagram. You can also visit the History Centre website at www.hullhistorycentre.org.uk. Thanks for watching.